This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, let's get started. My name is Flemming Jensen, and I am the Managing Director for Know-How Denmark, who is the one that has organized this webinar. Welcome, everybody. There's people from, more or less all over the world that at least has signed up for attending, so we should probably be a lot more before it's all over. What I will do is to give a short introduction to the to know-how and what we are doing, and then I will give the word to Stephen Ball from Embarcadero, who will be the one that will bring us hopefully safe through these webinars. Once again, welcome everybody, and I will try and step to the next slide. A little bit about Know-How Denmark. We have existed here in Denmark for nearly 30 years, and the main focus for our work has been selling still have someone that should mute their microphone.
Yeah, Flemming, are you able to add me as or update me to an organizer? And then I might be able to help with that in terms of muting people.
No, not right now.
No, okay.
But Peter Hansen, please mute your microphone. Perfect.
And we have Tony as well.
Tony, yeah. Tony, can you mute your microphone? Tony,
Okay,
could you please mute your microphone? Okay, then I do something different. Okay, can you hear me? I guess so. I have now muted everyone. So Stephen, I think you need to unmute yourself again.
Yeah.
A bit about Know-How. We are, as I said, nearly 30 years here in Denmark, and had our main focus on embedded design and development tools. For the first 15 years, that was what we were living off. And well, in the meantime, now software quality and test is also been a major part in the embedded environment, and functional safety and embedded security is also picking up. Cybersecurity, I believe we all hear about that more or less on a daily basis. And then coming to something which is today's topic, PC development tools. We started up as a Poland distributor 15 years ago and has been going the way with Embarcadero and well, first Poland and then Embarcadero. So we have been in that business for nearly 15 years. Our state is every software developer deserves great tool and support. And that's what we are trying to fulfill for our customers. Oops. Know-how is a part of Know-how Denmark is a part of a group of companies owned by Know-how in Sweden, and we have offices in Denmark, Sweden, and Finland. Totally, we are approximately 20 employees and have a turnover around 5 million euro. Besides that, we have a sister company located in Gothenburg in Sweden that is a consulting company doing mainly admin development, IT development, and test. So that's about know-how. I think there's not a lot of more to say, and therefore I will switch over to Stephen Ball.
Okay, thank you. Are you able to make me the presenter?
I will do that. I'm on the way. Here you go.
Great. Just putting that over to the screen. Oh. So I'm just having to rearrange my screen. It's flip something around here. Okay, should be able to see my screen now, can you?
Yep.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so yeah, thank you, Fleming, for the introduction. So we're going to be looking into Interspace over the next 45 minutes or so. So my name's Stephen Ball. I'm pre-sales director here at Embarcadero. I've done a number of different jobs in the past, but I'm currently on the pre-sales team. And if you need to kind of catch up with me, then either via Twitter or via email at delphiaball or stephen.ball@embarcadero.com. So our agenda for today, we're going to look at what is Interbase and why it gets chosen as a database platform. There's so many different stories that we could pick out from, but I've just picked a couple just to kind of give you an overview of where Interbase is being used and just kind of give us an area to be able to talk on in that area. And then we'll have a look at the different options around connectivity. And then we'll kind of dive into actually using Interbase and having a look at some of the bits integrated within RAD Studio for getting going with Interbase. So let's get straight in. Let's say we are live today. I've got the chat open. So if you do have any specific questions, then feel free to go ahead and throw anything into the chat as we're going through. I'll try and keep an eye on that as we're going through. So on a high level, what is Interbase? Well, Interbase is a fully featured database. It's got exceptionally good performance, but also has a very, very small footprint. One of the great things about using Interbase is that not only can you use it throughout the development cycle across any of the major platforms that you're working and targeting for, but at the point you're looking to deploy it and get it out, especially from an ISV's point of view, it's brilliant, because if you've got a customer who's got a single machine that's an entry level Windows kind of laptop that they're using, right the way up to having a customer who's running a few hundred connections across a local network into a single server. It just scales, and the value and the power that you get from the highly secure encryptable database, which has basically zero admin to it. It's a very self-reliant database. Means that you can just build your applications, get them out and deploy them. It's very resilient, because it's fully ACID compliant. It's one of the first ACID compliant databases to exist. And with the server-side capabilities of having distinguished dumps and using fast write-ahead logging, having point-in-time data recovery, it really does add a huge level of power and backup in terms of the systems that you're putting together. It's also really flexible when it comes to developing with InterBase. You can start building on Windows. It's really popular to use the Developer Edition with the RAD Studio to start building your applications, to start getting them working. And then at the point you're ready to move across to mobile, or you want to go and host it out onto Linux, or you need to run a Mac version, you can use the multi-compiler support within RAD Studio just to be able to target those platforms, and your database layer will be able to come with you, which is fantastic. It makes it so much easier, and because it's a single on-disk format, being able to work across the development's life cycle, it means if you ever do have any issues, and you're developing something in-house, you can just pull the database off the mobile device, put it onto your machine, and connect into it and start working with it. And that is really quite unique in terms of the way that it's set up and it works. The other thing about Interspace is it's very efficient. We've added in some really cool technologies in recent times. One of them, which is unique to Interspace, is the change views technology, and that provides complete logless change tracking of data. And it allows you to be disconnected at the time when those changes are happening and still be able to find out what's happened at a field level. And this is seeing some really interesting use cases come up where we're now seeing what's quite popular is Interspace actually going in and sitting alongside existing infrastructure. And we've seen this a few times with things like SQL Server or Oracle, where Interspace is going and sitting alongside it. And they've got specific data that they want to highly distribute and keep update out onto a large number of remote devices. And what they're doing is they're mirroring the data directly from the kind of the main systems or the embedded systems that are there already, and putting that data into Interspace and delegating that responsibility for that change tracking out to Interspace, and then using that as the conduit for being able to provide out individualized deltas that can be shared out to the remote kind of devices or sites. And that's all part of the kind of the whole change view tracking technology and the advanced kind of intelligence that are built into that to make the whole kind of change tracking work, with role-based user authentication, and also kind of the fact that Interspace has the strong encryption at rest. It helps it kind of really fit inside to the kind of the enterprise architectures very nicely. Which kind of brings us into the compliance side of things. Interspace is strongly compliant in terms of SQL standards that it matches up to. It's got great performance monitoring built into it. Obviously, we use OpenSSL to provide levels of encryption within the database at rest, and also being able to provide multi-key column encryption. So when it comes to looking at building things like say a mobile application that's doing financial transactions out on the edge somewhere, using a chip and pin device or something connected to an Android device, and you're caching some data in that you're going to then cache up, upload later on when you get back, or whatever. PCI compliance means that you really should have a separate encryption key used for the storage of the credit card data compared to the encryption of other data that you're using. So if you've got any personal identifiable data under GDPR, that needs to be encrypted at rest. Otherwise, you're leaving yourself potentially open to, I think, 4% of your global turnover or in the UK it's £200,000, whichever is the least, is basically where you can kind of get fined to, so whichever is more. So 200,000 is kind of the top level fine they can put, unless your turnover is more than 4%. 4% of your global turnover is more than that, then they can fine you higher. So data security is a real key thing, and being able to comply with those compliance. And that's one of the reasons why Interspace is really popular in the medical market. We've got a number of OEMs across Europe and America and down in APAC who are using Interspace within medical solutions. A lot of the kind of body scanners that you go into any hospital to see, the big MRI scanners have got Interspace embedded in them. It's being trusted with kind of critical data because of its resilience and because of its security. One of the other things that's pretty cool with the whole setup there is the events and alerts that you can set up on the Interspace connection. So if you are connected, you can actually set up to have alerts notifying you of change data table. So rather than having to constantly poll to see if there's any changes, you can actually get told by the database, hey, the table that you're interested in here, we've got some changes. And then you can start your, if you're using change views, you can start your subscription, run your SQL statement again, and you'll just get the delta of what's changed since it was last run, which is pretty cool. So just a little bit more in terms of some of the kind of the features around Interspace. Obviously, we kind of mentioned it's highly powerful, scalable. With Interspace, there's two options basically to the deployment of the database. There's either a server version or the to-go version. So I'll come back to this slide in a second, actually. But so the server version allows you to run 1 to hundreds of users connected in simultaneously to the same database file, and that allows across the network data traffic working. And we have that fully supported across Windows, Linux, and if you need to, there's Mac versions which we can get out to you as well. When it comes to the deeply embedded version, so we have Interspace to go is actually a set of libraries that you ship alongside your product, and this is what we use on mobile. And there's statically linked libraries on mobile that kind of bind into your application and then allow you to have the whole power of the Interspace engine for local connections only inside your application. But that also then works, that is available for iOS and Android and Linux as well. So across all the major platforms, you can work with Interspace to go. And we can do that because of the small footprint. The deeply embedded version is only a few meg, so it really doesn't make a huge dent in terms of the application installation. And for having a fully compliant database with the encryption and multiple user role-based. And one of the things that's really interesting from a compliance point, often you kind of look at mobile and you go, right, I'd like to put the data there. But then we end up with having the problems that you've got a development team who are having to develop an application and support an application as kind of third line support. And potentially, they need to connect to a specific data that's out there. Now, imagine you're building a HR application, and that human resources application has the chief executive's salary information in there, or the kind of the senior team members or any member of staff's salary information in there. Imagine now kind of saying to the developer, right, I need you to kind of connect into this to work out what's kind of happening. We're not seeing the right thing updating on the screen here, and they can just run a SQL statement to say select staff from salaries and see what everybody's getting paid. Well, that's not really good practice. And if you're using any other database on mobile, that's pretty much what you're going to end up with. But because we have the role-based authentication built in, and because we have this granular encryption and the ability to provide different decryption to different users, what you can end up doing is you can provide a default value back for anybody who doesn't have the HR responsibility rights. And the developer, because there's two separate users within the database for granting the rights to see specific data, and not, then you can have that set up by your database security officer on the database before it's given to the development team to then build in and deploy to the applications. So it means you can actually completely protect that kind of information, even from developers in the life cycle, which kind of gives you an idea of the kind of the compliance level that you can achieve using InterBase and getting out into these different situations. So hence kind of the different security elements there. On the server side, obviously there's quite a lot of self-tuning stuff that happens within the Interspace engine for queries that have been run multiple times. There's also kind of the ability to have multiple calls running on the server. So out of the box, I think SQL Server gives you 2 calls. With Interspace, you get 8 calls out of the box. So in terms of value for money, it is astonishingly good. We have also the ability to buy additional calls if you need them. And then recently in 2020, we had this thing called table spaces. And what table spaces allow you to do is if you've got specific tables within the database that are kind of maybe low hit, and you've got others that are kind of a high hit table in terms of the work on them, you can split those tables out onto different disks if you need to. So you might have an SSD that's running for the bits that you're having to regularly work through. And then another area of the database that is kind of lower hit that you might want to put onto some lower cost storage within your server. The other thing it allows you to do is if you've got indexes that are always being constantly rebuilt at the same time as updates that are going into a specific table, you can actually split those indexes and the table out onto separate disks. So you can then reduce the hardware bottleneck of any performance that's kind of happening behind the scenes on the database, which enables you to kind of just add that extra additional layer of performance into the system as well. And things like that, and the journaling, which allow you to kind of write ahead to the database. It basically puts the database into memory and works with the database as it's in memory, and then has periodic commits. But because it's a write ahead log, any changes are always tracked, and even if the server goes down and comes back up, it will know what it needs to reapply from the journal back into memory to then bring the database fully up to date, so you don't lose any data. And then you can kind of force the commits at any point that you want them. And that's really good from a speed and performance point, and that's what really helps Interbase scale out. We did some benchmark testing a few years back on Interbase against another open source variant, and we saw a major different speed performance after you did. There's a kind of standard warehouse test that you can do, and after 2 or 3 warehouses were added in, the performance really degradates on the other platform, whereas Interbase just keeps on climbing. It just keeps on going because of the kind of those kind of capabilities around journaling and stuff like that that's in place. So I've touched a little bit on a few of these as we've been going through, but where is Interbase used? And Interbase really is out of this world. It's been used in the past on the Space Shuttle. It used to be used to manage all the cargo manifests on the Space Shuttle for many years before that was put into retirement. There's a copy running actively up on Mars at the moment on the Mars rover, which is kind of pretty cool. A little bit hard to get a DBA up there to go and do any work. So hence Interbase got entrusted to that kind of mission. A little bit closer to home, and especially to the Nordics, because I thought you might like something a little bit closer to home. Opus Capita, a huge operation, providing electronic invoicing services to a range of governmental organisations and large blue chips, and they do a lot of the automation around account receivable and account payable, and processing the orders and bits to go through. Now, they chose Interbase because they had this new project they're working on a number of years ago, needed to scale out as it was going through. They now run this as a SaaS service, which they have everybody connecting into. And at their peak process, they're processing 500,000 new records a day into Interbase. Now, I know of another customer who is probably about 6 times the size of that in terms of their processing on a peak daily process. But 500,000 new records a day is pretty good going. You know, that's quite a lot of records that haven't processed. And you know, they chose Interbase because of the speed and performance, and because of the footprint that it has. And you know, they've openly said, you know, you can have a look at the case studies online. You know, the kind of server that they require to do this is, you know, a lot less than they're expecting to be able to run that kind of infrastructure through. Yeah, and they're all able to do that with everything that's built into Delphi and with a small development team. And their support is really minimal on it, which is brilliant. Another one from around Europe. This is Bonev Bsoft, who are an accounting company. They've got about 20,000 customers around Bulgaria and nearby countries. And they specialize in terms of doing all the tax, you know, credit areas and everything around the kind of the financial processing. And they've got, you know, PricewaterhouseCoopers are using it to process their customers locally, and the Bulgarian military are using it for processing data and processing through. And obviously, it's been through quite a strenuous, you know, checking and testing to make sure that it was compliant to be able to install and to run there as well. Yeah, they literally use Interbase. They have a small support team, and this is one of the key things in terms of the value from Interbase is that you don't need to have a highly skilled support team to back it up and run. You know, there is some basics that you need to know, but it is really straightforward to kind of get up and support. So from an ISV's point of view, you know, you haven't got a $50,000 a year, $60,000 a year you know, headcount for, you know, a junior database administrator, or even more for a senior one. You know, you just don't need to worry about that kind of thing that you'd have to for other databases, which is great. If you're interested in seeing some more through case studies, there's one up there from BitTime in Italy, Management Plus, which is one through medical again, using all the eye care side of things, and Bionuclear, who have been processing, you know, huge number of lab results in the last year. I'm sure we can understand why. They're again using Interbase in a distributed model around Latin America. Parswing Miller, again, these guys are using it in spa software and within hotels. There's additional ones on InterBase.com, which is a new website that we've launched recently specifically just for Interbase, because of the amount of demand that we're getting around the kind of the different technology stacks that are in there now. So when it comes to connecting to Interbase, obviously for you know, the audience today is very much a RAD Studio audience. There's brilliant support for both IBX, Interbase Express, but also for FireDAC. And if you go to docwiki.embarcadero.com, you'll be able to find the the documentation there for connecting into it. And we'll have a look at some examples and bits there here now as we go through. But wider afield, there's Odbc and Jdbc connectivity. So pretty much any system that you need to that's got open connectivity, you can connect Interbase into it. We've got integrations that are being used within Eclipse, with PHP, with Python, with Ruby. There's new drivers have just been launched for Visual Studio with entity framework connectivity using the latest kind of .NET provider setup. So the links for those are just on the screen here. But also if you go to the interbase.com website and go to the resources page, you'll be able to find the links to those listed up on there as well. So really kind of through to the kind of the key bit that I want to get into today, and that was just kind of skipping through getting in and using Interbase. So I'm just going to move across to my VM here. Hopefully you can see my screen okay. Let's I'm just going to put my layout here onto my default layout. and just open everything up. So we know within RAD Studio, one thing we've got is the Data Explorer. Within the Data Explorer, under FireDAC, there is the option for it in here for InterBase, and there's also InterBase Lite, which allows you to test using the free distributable version of InterBase, IB Lite, which is basically InterBase to go. It doesn't contain change views, encryption, but it does provide user security. Role-based user authentication to put in there, so you can build and have something better than kind of like a SQLite deployment or something at least. And I think it's a couple hundred meg in terms of on disk. So for a mobile application, that's absolutely perfect. But here under InterBase, I've already been in and added a connection, but it's quite easy. Just go to add connection, give it a name that you want, and then it'll open up the connection dialog. So I'm just going to modify the connection here. And here you can see kind of all the default settings that come up. So it's quite easy to just go ahead and set the path, set your username password for your database. Standard is sysdba master key, but obviously recommend creating your own username password. If it's running remotely, then you put the server address in there. If you're running on different instances, one of the things about InterBase is you can have multiple instances running. So you could have it running on port 3050, which is default, but you could choose any port and have multiple instances running and add those in here. You can set default character sets. You can, if you're using encryption, all you need to do is just add the encryption password in here as you kind of go. The other thing that's quite nice through the connections here, if you are converting from other databases into InterBase, you can set up different data handling mappings. So if you've got different types of dates and times and bits that you want to kind of start working with in the same way within RAD Studio, then you can start setting handlings up. You can check the information around the database in here, which is pretty cool. You can also go ahead and run SQL scripts directly on the database. So if you had add a specific field in, you could come in here and you could just alter table foo and go ahead and start putting in the rest of the statement to how you want to alter the database or do anything you want to do in testing. The other thing within the Data Explorer, obviously you've got tables, views, procedures, generators, so you can get a full view of specifically what are listed directly from in here. So in fact, let's just go ahead. I'm just going to do a quick VCL application here. And if I just drag the employee table across, you can see that's put down the FireDAC connection. You'll need one of those. One of the things that's quite nice on the FireDAC setup is this connected stored usage. So you can set kind of runtime or design time. So I'm going to uncheck runtime because I want this connected to be false at runtime. So I can then go ahead and explicitly connect it. And you'd normally want to do that because you're setting up the pathing to the database when you launch your application for the first time. You might kind of read in and say, right, here's the path to my database to go and set it before you connect. If you're doing that, then that's a really, really useful thing. If you're just doing some testing, you want to just leave it always connected, then you can just leave that connected. So I'm going to set this to connected here. The table query here is actually just a normal SQL query with the select statement. And the reason for that is you can just edit the data directly from the result here. If you need to do specific updates, if you've got multiple tables that are being joined together and you want to put specific statements for doing updates, then again, there's a component you can use to do that. But I've got my data here, so let's just go ahead and set that active. It's going to put down a DB grid here quickly. Data source. And let's connect that to the data set. So it literally can be as easy as that to kind of get your data out using InterBase. Yeah, I was saying about the different updates. Here we can see there's an update object. You can use multiple transactions with InterBase. And one of the things with InterBase, you can have different types of transaction states. So for example, one of the things I used to have to do when we were doing financial reporting is you want to kind of get a snapshot view of the data. So even if you've got POS systems that are running tills still, you kind of say, right, this is the time that I'm taking the snapshot, and I'll do my reports against it at this point. So you can create a transaction that is in a snapshot mode. So it reads everything committed up until the point that the transaction started. So it still allows you to write other stuff to the database, but you can still run a consistent report to check against what's been happening with different transaction reports and stock level reports before you then move on. So that just kind of helps in terms of point in time setup. So yeah, you can get the update SQL here. And again, here you can see you can set up the delete, insert, modify, and so on, which is pretty good. And there's also the update SQL Editor. So for example, here you can say, well, this is on we will do the employee table. So you can see here, these are the fields that are updating, these are ones that are going to be refreshed, and you can generate SQL here that is then going to be used for those specific jobs. So it can help kind of really go in and start doing a base level of what you want to do, which is really, really good. Okay, so that's a very, very quick overview. Again, if you want to just add the connections in here, you can just do FD connection. The one thing that you probably want to do, or you need to have in your application as a singleton, is to put in the driver link. So I'm just going to get rid of the grid out of the way. I'd normally recommend putting these onto a data module and then linking your forms into them, just having your business logic and your UI separated out. But here, this is the InterBase driver link. Now, I mentioned earlier about InterBase having to go and server edition. Well, in here, there's an option here, light, which is the lightweight version of InterBase. So if you enable light, that's basically saying use the to-go libraries. And you can also override specifically kind of the vendor home and the vendor library. So if you've got multiple versions of InterBase installed, you can it will look specifically at the application folder where the application is running initially for the libraries, and then it will go to the systems directory and so on. So if you wanted to override and say specifically use this version of the InterBase libraries, I want to use kind of 2017 version, you can hard code and set up where the vendor home is or the libraries that you want to use specifically. So if the library is specified, it will just pick that up. Otherwise, it will check the vendor home for the libraries that are required for the version that's running and pick that up. So some great flexibility in terms of the providing. The other one that you would have to put into an application for doing updates and bits is the wait cursor. So here you can just choose the provider that you want. If it's the console one or if it's a forms or an FMX one, then you go ahead and define which one you want to use here. So here we're running a VCL application, so we would choose the VCL version. Console is really used on web services and kind of console applications. And that basically then just helps across all of the FIDAC connections in terms of just displaying the SQL wait cursor or not, depending on what's kind of happening. It'll automate all that kind of side of things for you, which is pretty good. Okay, so let's have a look at what we need to do in terms of using InterBase in a mobile application. So I'm just going to quick look. There's a couple of messages popped in here. Just to answer those quickly. So Stephen was asking about the BDE having a database desktop where you can create tables and structures when required. So what you can do is you can create, obviously with FireDAC, you can create in-memory tables, and you can literally just save those down to disk and back up if you want to do kind of temporary table kind of work. Otherwise, you can just create a table using some standard SQL and work with that directly. Also, you've got IB Lite, which is free to use and would kind of give you something comparable to what you've been using on the BDE setup from before. But if you're still using the BDE, ouch. Yeah, have a look at Refind. Refind is an absolutely fantastic tool to help go through and convert. The FireDAC was written as a replacement for the BDE from the ground up, so it has all the kind of same request live and all that kind of side of things, and it's bidirectional data, unlike DB Express, which is unidirectional, which then meant you needed client data sets as well and stuff like that. None of that with FireDAC. It's really a very, very straightforward replacement. And you can still kind of connect it up to kind of paradox tables as well using Jdbc. So yeah, definitely a great way to move and push forward. And Refind will automate that whole kind of process of changing across as well, which is pretty good. How easy is it to change from SQLite across to Interbase to go? Yeah, pretty straightforward. Depending obviously what you're using within SQLite, but yeah, you've got more functionality in Interbase in certain areas. There are certain things that SQLite does that are very specific to it. So again, have a look, but a good chunk of it should be pretty straightforward to move across. Okay, let me carry on and to mobile, and I'll kind of pick up any of the other questions just at the end. So what I'm going to show you is quickly, I'm just going to jump into an application that I've written. It just shows you, I'm just going to show you kind of one of my core data modules. That's some testing I've been doing on tethering, which is fine. So I've got this app. I'm a basketball referee, you can probably see from the screen, my wall behind me. I've got my basketball shirt up from years ago playing. We've doing some of the exams that I need to do. I had all these kind of different scenario questions that I need to do, multiple choice. So I just threw them into a database, as you do, and built a test so I could practice working my way through them and seeing the different scenarios and so on, and shared that with a few of my other colleagues, and we kind of ended up kind of publishing it eventually onto the App Store. Now, one of the things that I have in there is a database connection. So I've got this data module for Interspace, which I use the same data module across multiple applications. And here I've got my database connection, my physical driver link, my wait cursor. So the three that I mentioned about before. And then literally I've got a method which I use on the after connect just to ask the database to give me a list of all the tables. So I can then just check if certain tables exist. If they don't, then I know that I've got SQL scripts to run for things that I've added over time, which just makes life a little bit easier. I've also got on here a function to acquire a query, which then basically just creates a query. My keyboard mapping not working there. So let me just go to the acquire query. So basically, I just create an instance of a query and set the database connection. So it just kind of removes a couple of lines of code, turns it into one. But it also allows me, in the future, if I was using, and I have used this on websites, I've had the same code running, and I've actually had a pool of data connections which I'm running. Obviously, in this instance, I don't need a pool of data connections, so I just use the acquire query. But the connection after connection here. So I've got two methods here. One is the connection. the creation of the data module. So here we just set up the physical driver link to be light, because I know I'm going to be using Interspace to go. And then I just set the connection. And then I've got a before connect event that just sets up my database parameters. So I'm using here tpath.combine. So this is part of the system with IOU tils. I'm taking the documents path and the database file. So the database file is just a constant that I've got set up. I'm then able to just check that the file exists and make sure it's been deployed. Otherwise, I just throw up a warning message. So that's pretty much all I need to do there. So under my project, under the deployment, along with all the other files that I've got, here I can see I've got my database file. So for Android, it goes just to asset internals. And if I kind of order by the local path, hopefully it's on the Android version only. So let's go and have a look at iOS. Here we can see we've got startup documents. So these are the core kind of base folder locations. So I've got a folder which I've got my database locally in, and my master database version, which I'm then deploying out just to save me doing a lot of stuff within code. And then I kind of update and create any additional tables and fields I need over time from what's missing. So this is a great way to be able to kind of package in a fully encrypted database that I know is working, it's tested, everything is done. I can then just deploy it out directly across onto mobile and use it. So I've got my local copy of the database, which I'm able to use and connect and work with at design time, and the testing that I'm doing on my local machine. And then I'm able to set up and deploy out a specific version here. Now, what I can do, obviously, with multiple different versions, I can set up my debug build version here to deploy my local copy of it if I want to do specific testing and so on. So you can really play around with different build configurations. And if you want to add additional build configurations for, like beta test or alpha test before you go through to doing some other stuff, then again, you can do that here, which is quite cool. So the other thing I'm just going to show you here is where I actually create that data module. So on the project source here, you can see here that all I do is I create the home form on the mobile application. And the reason to do that is because I want to kind of get the application up and running just to start before I start doing anything else. And then on the home form, basically I have a method called start database. So the methods that I call on there, you can see here, start DB. That's the first thing I do. Anything on this home form, start DB, and off I go. That then starts up the database, basically checks to see if it's been initiated. If not, creates the instance of the data module, and off we go, which just is a simple way to kind of work through that. Okay. The last thing I want to show you is just the admin APIs, and this is a really useful thing when you're working with Interspace, when you've got database applications putting together. And these APIs you can use out on mobile, you can use them on desktop in terms of querying and running stuff through, which is pretty useful. But also you can use them to connect across the network to an Interspace instance. So if you did have an application that you're putting together on mobile for managing multiple servers, then you could put that onto a tablet, go around your server room and just kind of point it to the right database server and connect up and go. So under the sample projects, under data, under data, under Object Pascal or under C++, under database, FireDAC, samples, DBMS specific, specific database version, because these are specific features of Interspace rather than just the general how to do things with FireDAC. Under Interspace, there's 3 demos here that are pretty useful. One is if you're ever wanting to do an array field, so you can have a field that's got multiple storage slots in it. I see that used in IoT quite a bit, where you've got multiple data readings that you want to put back. There's a change views demo, which speaking about change views earlier, that is really worth having a dive into. But the one I'm going to have a look at here is just the admin API. So within here, there's a data module that you can actually take out straight away and put into your own applications, which has got thread support safe on it, thread safe support on it, to allow you to basically do the generic tasks. It's just got methods to call, and it'll then go and spin these up in kind of background thread for you. But yeah, here basically we've got the ability to set up the local host, or which machine you're connecting to. So it could be a TCP/IP across the network or something. Username, password that you're using. If you're using encryption, the encryption key that you need to set up. And then here, there's a few different admin APIs that we're just showing. So one for backing up, where you can set different options for the backup. So you set the path that you want to back up from, the database you want to back up from, and where you want to back it up to. Now that pathing needs to be on the same server. It's just a physical location path. You can't back up from server A direct to server B for security reasons, but you can back it up and then move the backup file afterwards. It's up to you. Restoring, again, you can choose from one file and restore back through elsewhere. And then the validate stuff is really useful, especially from an ISV point of view, managing and supporting Interbase. There's a set of options that you can do to validate a database. So you get everybody out of the system, you can then validate the database. If there's any errors caused by corruptions on disk or anything else like that, then you can ask Interbase to try and fix those issues. Using the mend records option, and that's really, really useful. And you can then back up and restore through, and most of the time you'll be able to restore and get that database back up and running. It's very, very, very resilient. So I used to support over 500 sites, and it's very, very rare that we ever had a database that we had to go to a backup tape to get a backup version through from. We were normally able to kind of take the live database and get it sorted and back up and running, regardless of what had happened to the disk. Which is pretty cool. So yeah, let's just jump back into the data module here and have a quick look at the components. So again, we've got the physical driver link, we've got the wait cursor, and then each of these components just work. You just set the properties up on them and call the execute commands basically, and they'll go do the bits that they need to do. You can add users, you can review the users. There's a whole different set of things that you can do. So I'm just going to run this here and show you a backup and restore of a database very quickly. So here I can just refresh. I can see here that I've got basketball and sysdba are the users of my local Interbase server. In terms of backing up, let's just go ahead here. Here's my employee database. So I'm going to create an IB backup file and just back that up. So yep, that's pretty good. Okay, that has ended. Fine. The restore here. Here's my my backup file, and let's just give this a new file name. And I'm going to call it .ib rather than .gdb. That's just an extension in that tool there. Reason I'd use .ib rather than GDB is Microsoft added a few years back .gdb is a protected file extension. So that causes kind of sometimes it can cause a slowdown before you access the file, which is kind of cool. But so you can, being able to automate this directly from your application is really, really useful. I always love the finishing, closing, and going home. The one thing I would say is that when it comes to running a support desk, I used to give my InterBase team, or my support guys, about 15 minutes training in terms of how to use a tool very similar to this to back up and restore databases if they ever had any problems, and how to validate and mend them and restore them. And most of the time, they were able to get things resolved without having to kind of contact second or third line support. So this is a really, really useful thing, especially if you need to do any kind of checks. Obviously, the key thing, just to make sure you got people out of the database before you run any of those. Okay, so I think that's pretty much what we've got time for to run through. So let's just jump back to my slide deck here. I say we do have an Interspace VAR program, which you get a dedicated partner manager. So in Denmark it would be know-how, and also you'd be backed up directly with their partner manager internally as well. We offer volume license discounting depending on the kind of deployment and kind of what you're doing. We have the ability to have silent installs, so it's completely silently installed along with your application out on the server side. Obviously, that's a given on the mobile platforms. We also have this thing called an Sdk Pack, which basically provides you some really kind of advanced testing licenses for as you're kind of getting going into the VAR program, which, if you're not ready to put a full commitment, financial commitment in for that, then that gives you a way to kind of get the development going before you kind of move on. Okay, so let's jump back to any kind of Q&A that we have here. So yeah, follow up, Stephen. In terms of the BDE migration, Stephen, if you want to email me, stephen.ball@embarcadero.com, then what we can do is I'll email you over a sheet that we've recently done, which is my email is just up on screen there now, which has got pointers to a whole load of things for data migration and moving through. One of the key things is the migration center on the Embarcadero website. So if you go to the embarcadero.com website, at the top you'll find the update center, or the update migration center link. If you click on that, that'll take you through, and there's some videos that I've done with some of the other migration experts to take people through. And in fact, one of the videos that we have there is a full BDE migration to FireDAC, showing the steps using refined and doing everything through from the Unicode to BDE migration, to help file modernization, to a whole load of things. So if you're stuck on older versions you need to move through, then definitely the Migration Center is a good place to start off. Nice message from Stefan. A lot of things learned, which is brilliant. I'm glad that's been useful for you today. Okay, so Alf's put here, he's got a program that he's been looking at, and it used SQLite as a database, and using FireDAC, he's able to quite easily break into their database and see all the data. Yeah, well, that will be a thing with SQLite. It's just a flat file on steroids, basically. And yeah, SQL, it's very easy for FireDAC to connect into that. I'd say, the easy thing to do is, open it up, work out what you want as the metadata, build your set of tables in Interspace, and push them in. And certainly for mobile, using the Enterprise edition of RAD Studio includes a full runtime royalty-free distribution of Interspace to go. I'll say that again, a full runtime royalty-free distribution of Interspace to go. So if you need to have secure data on mobile, the choice is Interspace, because you have it for Windows, Mac, iOS, Android, Linux, and it's free on Android and iOS to deploy those databases. So yeah, go ahead, use Interspace to go, encrypt your database, You've seen today how you can easily deploy that file straight up onto the mobile application, how to set the pathing for it, and how to connect up and go. So yeah, that'd definitely be the way to go. Convert it across. And as you say, with Vidac, it's a very easy way to convert from one database to another. So. Okay, last call for any other questions. I say if you are interested at being able to pick up and go with Interspace, what I can do is I can follow up this session with a sheet that we've got here of getting started with Interspace for Rad Studio developers. So we can send that out. We also have one for Visual Studio developers. So if you're using Visual Studio, please go ahead and just let me know, and I can make sure you get that copy sent out to you instead. Yeah, or actually, easier than that, let's just show you where to go and get it yourself. So if you come here to interbase.com, up on the resources page, if you just scroll down here, here there's the getting started for .NET developers and for Rad Studio developers. So if you just come there and click on that, then you've got the info sheet directly to hand. And that gives you kind of the key information about where it is, where to go, where the key documentation is, and the different tooling. It'll tell you about how to, what IB console is and where to kind of start up with that and so on. So, and if you look on the Architect edition of Rad Studio, it tells you about the really super cool Aquadata Studio IDE, which is fantastic. And I'd highly recommend having a look at that. Okay, Fleming, I think
Yep.
Back to you.
Super. Thank you, Stephen, for the very interesting presentation. I think everybody has learned a lot, hopefully at least. And I think I would just finalize from here saying goodbye to everyone. Thank you for attending, and look forward to meet you again on one of our webinars. Bye-bye.
Okay, cheers everyone. Bye-bye. Happy coding.